It's week 10. The season is over. Let's look at the final few games. Let's take a look at this game between Pete and Cara, and today we're going to be looking at the games from the black player's perspective. So we get a London. This e5 push, it's okay, but you are losing a pawn. So just be aware that you're running into that. White instead drops the bishop back. And now black has good control of the center. They've gotten some pieces out. White comes out to try to attack the pawn in the middle. Castling's okay. I think just simpler is just to defend the pawn, and central pawns are usually good to hold on to. But on the other hand, from this side, black is playing with a lot of energy. They've already castled, and now their pieces can, launch into the game. They can start moving their pawns forward. They have a lot of options. Whereas for white, because of this jumble of pieces here, it's going to be hard for them to get their pieces into the game. And we get a check on the side, which does put some pressure on the position for black. I think just getting another piece into the game makes a lot of sense, either to here or to here. You might be thinking about, do these double pawns cause any issues? But in this kind of structure where you're up a lot of time, the double pawn is not that important. Actually, this open B line could be more useful for black than the double pawns are a weakness. Instead, we get a check, and then this queen comes forward, which does cut off, like a king escape square. Unfortunately, it runs into a tactic of c3, the bishop drops back, and then the pawn goes forward, forking the two pieces here. So you have to be kind of careful when you get your pieces into these positions where they start to lose some of their mobility and flexibility. And getting another piece into the game would probably be preferable. Knight drops back, forking the two pieces here. And now white's in a good position because this pawn's going to go forward, attack the queen, which it does. The queen drops. And now white's in a pretty great position at this point. Pick up the knight, they push the pawn forward. It's now really wedged deep into black's position here. And brings the queen in. So now all these pieces are now starting to loom around. So from like this position where white was really jumbled and having a hard time developing, now everything is starting to come for the black king. And the knight jumps forward, and good sacrifice here, just opening up the position. Something good's going to happen here. You don't even have to necessarily calculate it all the way through. Didn't even take the rook, went for the pawn. Appreciate that. Break open the position. Queen comes in. Push the pawn forward. Bishop drops back. Nothing really else to do. And now a fun little move. Taking the pawn and with a promotion checkmate. So very nice. I don't think we've had a promotion checkmate yet in Blunderbuss. So happy to get that in before the end of the season. Okay, the next game we're going to look at is between Elliot and Collin. And we get the Tennyson Gambit, a very, very interesting and pretty aggressive opening. Interesting choice. Your knight gets kind of driven out to the side here, but overall this kind of position here, it leaves open lines against black's king. And I think already, if you could get the bishop here, you're starting to cover some interesting ideas. Not sure if there's any real way for, I guess, black maybe has to give back a pawn or something like that in this position. So bringing this bishop out to here would be a great way of taking advantage of this diagonal. Instead, white goes directly for the check. So again, just thinking like if you can get the bishop to here, it's a different way of taking advantage of the same weak square. Just another one to keep an eye on. Queen gets driven back, and now we get bishop or the pawns. Lots of tension happening in the position now between the pawns in the middle. Black tries to castle out of the threat, and white is going all in on attacking the king. And this is actually a really good, I think, approach in general. If you can put a lot of pressure on your opponent and they have to make very precise moves, then you're likely to, find a breakthrough that will, a tactic that might win you the game. Yeah, and you see with black already like making moves on this side of the board, all the action is happening, over here, in this area. So this b6 move, I guess, is designed to maybe get this bishop in, but this bishop already has lines and is already actually doing a job. You're not going to want to bring your bishop out this way. You get a bunch of pawn trades in the center, and then black does bring their bishop out to the side here. This does open up a lot of possibilities for white, with the e6 pawn no longer, or the e6 square no longer covered. Bishop drops, knight comes forward attacking the queen, and drops back with a check, which is a good kind of foresight to see that you can force this check and maybe force some tactics into the position. Blocks. And we get an exchange here, and now the knight has now finally landed on e6, forking the two pieces and winning the rook. And now the rook comes over to the g file, and now this king is looking very, very weak right now. And these pieces are also in, very loose, right? Like they're not well defended at this point. And what from the white side you need to be thinking about is getting these other two pieces into the game or exchanged off, and try to get your king castled as soon as you can. So we get the bishop traded off, which is good. Pawn going forward, which is totally fine, totally aggressive. Again, I'd be thinking about just get a knight. You can actually get the knight to d2. And then there's nothing to stop you from castling on the next turn. You're already at material, so you don't need to win more material at this point. You don't need to continue the attack. You can just, you're up a rook. So just take your rook and win the game. And then here's where things kind of switch back. So the pawn goes forward attacking the knight. Black tries to counterattack with bringing the rook over. There's really two ways to kind of deal with this, and the simplest is really just to take the rook. Any capture from black is fine. Probably the best one for them to do is to take with the knight, but again, you bring your knight to d2, you castle, and everything's fine. By dropping the queen back, you're now like opening up opportunities for black to make some aggressive moves. And they attack the queen again, just trading off the rook here, and then that would open up the queen or the king, and now you can put in a fork, which would then force either they can't even do this because of, well, they could, but again, you bring your knight in, you're going to win the game. So this like rook exchange here is just really kind of critical. And anytime you're up material, just swap that extra piece off. You'll make it easier for you. But coming back now results in, well, black did miss a nice checkmate here, but still picks up the rook, comes back with a check, brings down the rook and pins the queen. And now at this point, black is at too much material, cleans up the rest of the pawns, sends another pawn down the board, and white resigned the game at this point, which is totally fair. Checkmate's coming next move. But I think white played a great game up until up until this point where they missed those opportunities to swap off the extra rook. Any move here that would have swapped off this rook would have been and would have made the win a lot simpler for white. We are going to look at the game between Vernon and Ryan. So again, English opening, and we get this f6 move. I think instead, pushing the pawn forward is probably the most aggressive way. You drive this knight to some square. It's defended by the bishop right now, so the queen can't take it. Here, I'll turn on analysis. Then you'd bring out knight, and play would continue from here. F6 kind of opens up this diagonal to the queen or to the king, and that can always be a little bit troublesome and difficult to deal with. But overall, I think both players have been playing pretty soundly. We've got all 4 minor pieces out. We've got a battle going on for the center between these pawns and these knights here. So everybody's been playing pretty sound principle chess. And then this knight goes jumping off to the side here, which you're trying to find. You are trying to maybe like open up this bishop. I would say first get your king castled. Probably solidify your structure in the center with your pawn, and then you can start to look at these knight moves where maybe you're jumping this way or you're jumping over here to put pressure on this pawn. But by jumping right away, you hang the pawn in the center, and now actually white's picked up 2 pawns, and then we get into a position here where white's up 2 pawns, but these 2 pawns are 2 central pawns that are controlling a lot of the position right now, and it's really hard for black to make any kind of progress. This bishop's blocked out. This knight can't retreat back to the square it would like to. Maybe this bishop can find some activity along this diagonal here, but otherwise it's a tougher position for black to play than it is for white. White gives a good check, and connects 4s in the middle here. Knight's under attack now though from the queen, and so they jump forward with their queen to defend it. Well, there's a fork in the position with this knight move, so that'd probably be the more aggressive approach to it. The only risk with bringing your queen here is kind of like how it happens in the game. It gets forked by the knight, which is good eye from black to see the fork here. And then, now black's got a rook for a knight and 2 pawns. So overall material is fully even. But it's now become an imbalance between the 2 sides. So no reason to give the bishop here. I think you can, probably just drop it back. But gives up the bishop, then takes the pawn. And now you've kind of reached this position where, it's going to be hard for, this bishop is well anchored in the position here. And the queen will slide out of the way, maintaining contact with the knight. The other pawn will go forward, and even though black has this extra rook, it's hard to make any use of it with all the activity in the position. The knight drop back is not necessary. There's no real threats in here, so I think going forward is a better use of the move. By dropping back, you're blocking this rook, and you want to get this rook into the game. It's your only rook you have, so you'd like to get it probably to this square here where you put a lot of pressure. And again, interesting kind of sequence here. So this queen moved over. It is free for the taking, so no reason not to take the queen. White slides the queen out of the way, which exposes, because of this rook now here and this whole knight retreat, right? It has exposed checkmate in the position. But black instead, who's been attacking this knight all game, decides to take the knight, which then leaves open the queen coming down to the back rank for checkmate. A nice little, fun little sequence to end the game where both players missed the opportunities that the other player gave to him until it ended the game. Okay, this next game is between Kyle and Sean. This game is 73 moves long, so we are not going to spend a lot of time on all the moves in here, but I think the end is a lot of fun, so we want to get there and check it out. So we get a D-pawn game here, kind of a London setup. And bishop moves an extra time. Probably no reason to do that, but pins the knight, putting some pressure here. Knight jumps in and captures the pawn here. I think just reinforcing is the simplest way of playing this position. But with the capture, now the knight drops off. And now the rook's going to drop off. And so black's now is up a good chunk of material, but white keeps fighting back. And we are 17 moves in. We got 60 more to go. And knight comes in, attacking the queen. So the queen drops back. And fun little tactic here, setting up a little discovery action. The bishop, though, is undefended, so black takes the bishop, knight jumps out of the way, and the queen drops off. And so we get an interesting imbalance. Black is up a lot of material with these extra pieces and rook. So they're really up, what was that? 2 knights, a bishop, and a rook for a queen, which is a lot of material. But it's harder to coordinate. You know, it's easier to move with the queen. And white does a good job. The queen has now gone from this corner here and snuck all the way up into this position here to give a check. And tries to force open any kind of lines. Avoids the back rank mate. So keeping an eye on all of black's ideas. And the knight now is undefended, and white picks it up. So we get some checks, and the rook now drops. Bishop moves out of the way with a discovery onto the queen. So queen jumps out of the way. There is a draw here. Oh, I see. You attack the rook. Either the rook has to move out of the way, and then you pick up the bishop. That's a good little tactic there. Opportunity for white. And then with 2 rooks versus a queen, with only these pawns here, it should equal a draw. Instead, black has done a good job of using their pieces in ways to coordinate against weak points in white's camp. Pick up some of the pawns here. The bishop does drop off. But at this point now, the rooks are coordinated. There's this extra passed pawn on the outside. And this should be a lot for white to deal with. I think here maybe you can... I was looking at maybe can you pin the rook and make it harder for black to coordinate. So they attack the rook. And now like the hard part is because now the rooks are coordinated and they're putting pressure and attacking, it's going to be hard to defend all your pieces. So white's trying to give checks, trying to pin pieces where they can, and really making a good use of as many tactics as they can to hold on to this pawn. As long as this rook can't move, they can't take this pawn. But now the king slides out of the way, and there's nothing really stopping an eventual breakthrough where this pawn will fall, and then it should be too much for white to handle. Pawn drops, gets some checks, and black runs their king back, and now this pawn is about to run through. So white gives some checks here, trying to give as many checks as they can. But now the king has found safety. There's no more checks. Square's covered. That's the only one that white can move to give a check, other than taking the rook. So they take the rook. We get a new queen made. White's king is forced to the side of the board. Almost any queen move would finish this game, but the rook moved, and we get a stalemate. Okay, let's take a look at the game between Steven and Alex. Get a pretty casual opening from the white side, and then defending the bishop with the pawn here. Probably simplest is to just take it. Just take. Sometimes that's the better move. And the knight jumps into position. This is a little bit loose. This knight doesn't have, it's only defended by the bishop here. It's already got some pressure on it, which, could open up some possible tactics on the position here. But the knight gets driven back, and now the knight jumps in, but it is taken. And we get a rook chopped off on this side. So it's kind of an interesting, it's a kind of an intentional tactic from the white side I see now, of moving the knight forward, bringing that knight forward, luring, now attacking with the pawn and exposing this this diagonal here to win the rook. I think, instead trying to see if there's a way to trap this bishop in here. It doesn't look like there is, so maybe this actually works out okay for the white side. It's always dodgy when your light square bishop gets stuck down at this side. Instead, the knight jumps forward. King moves out of the way. No reason not to bring your bishop all the way back. Sometimes those long retreating moves are hard to see, but your bishop was along this diagonal. So kind of like recognizing, one way like to help visualize that is just know my bishop is controlling this whole thing along here, and just know that like all these squares are under its sight at that time, and that can kind of help you see these potential retreating moves. Instead, black was able to get the knight back, retreat it sensibly back into their position, and now we have a situation where white does have this rook, but because of the inability for the king to castle and potential of things, I don't know, like this knight coming to, these squares here, black should be able to take good advantage of the position, or it has potential to take advantage of the position. And black's going forward, and you can see that like how this has opened up a lot of squares for white's king. And again, that bishop could have come all the way back and helped block that check and defended. So now the bishop drops off, and then the queen drops off. This queen has made massive, covered lots of ground in a couple of moves. Picks up a pawn, captured 2 pieces. That's a very busy queen. The pawn move, I'd be tempted just to capture, with the idea that they can't capture this way because the knight hangs. So maybe they have to capture with the knight, but this starts to feel like, oh, I could bring pieces back and start to coordinate an attack on the white king here. Actually, you don't even have to do that. You can just bring the rook over and pin. Instead, black is taking a lot of the pawns. Probably recapturing is the sensible move. You are still up a piece. You can bring your bishop back. Everything's nice and well defended. Instead, the king runs to the corner, which then drops that knight. So now we are... black is up 2 pawns, but one of those pawns is very close to queening, and that square is covered. And white's king is fighting for the center of the board. Black drops back their queen, gives some checks. And we start to see there's going to be lots of checks on this white king that's running through the center of the board here. Good job not hanging the rook and the checkmate. I think when you're up a lot of this material, I think you can just go in for a simple line like this. Black drops their queen, but then makes a new queen. Or maybe this was a diversion tactic to pull the rook out of the way. And we get this tension between the 2 pieces here. Black drops back the bishop to attack the queen, but that leaves checkmate on the board. So kind of, I think black needed to keep the rook solid, and maybe start to bring the bishop back and first kind of coordinate some of the other pieces before going for it. But look at this king. Look at this white king. Right there. Coordinate, leaning from the front. That's a good general right there. Okay, the last game we're going to look at is between Jeremy and Ashley. And Ashley had a particular question about a knight move in the middle of the game that switches the evaluation from winning for black to losing for black. So we're going to take a look at that and what was happening there. So we get a Sicilian with a strike in the center. So this is a pretty direct way of playing with the Sicilian, and actually pretty practical, right? Like you're going to force some of the pieces off in the center, and black now occupies the center with their queen, and this pawn is controlling a key square in the center of the position. So black's probably got a little bit more space here. They're going to be able to get their bishop out to this long diagonal, and it should look pretty nice for them. White, though, following good principles and gets castled, and black comes forward and pins the piece. I think instead of the pin, I would be looking at just moving the bishop up. And the idea is that you just get castled as fast as you can. Prioritizing that kind of kingside development is usually the better side, and then you can worry about these pieces in a minute. But really, there's technically nothing wrong with this. You are putting pressure here. You might be able to double up the pawns on the f3 square. And white jumps forward, attacking the queen. So the queen now needs to retreat to some other square. There's queen goes back to d7. I would recommend looking at this h5 square, where you'd put as much pressure onto the pin knight as possible. Be hard for white to resolve this. You're very likely to end up doubling these pawns here, either with a queen trade or without. And either way, that should be favorable for black. Going back here, you kind of leave a little bit of pressure off of this knight and give it a little bit more freedom. I mean, the other square you could look at is actually going back this way, which does take the square from the knight, but the knight can, hop in into some other squares. And now we get the continue the kingside development. White's kind of going on this expedition on the side here. There's no real threat here. In fact, you can probably just kick the knight back right away. Nothing wrong with just sending it home. Instead, black moves forward with the c5 push. And I think this move, more than the knight move we're about to see, is more the critical kind of error in the position. Particularly at this level, I would say castling is just the simplest approach. You now have, an ideal bishop here. You're going to kick this knight back, with this push. Your knight's going to come out to an ideal square. And from black's perspective, all their pieces are finding good locations to do battle, whereas white will have a harder time. And it's all because actually of this pawn. So we've talked about pawns in another episode. This pawn is controlling and limiting the space for white right now, and this is the real value in the position. By pushing this e5 pawn forward, you're kind of opening up. Your king is not castled yet, so you're kind of going on this aggressive forward overture a little bit prematurely. And white spends a lot of time here and calculates a variety of lines and plays knight takes e5, which attacks the queen, also exposes their queen to attacks. And so the lines here that are critical to evaluate are, well, what happens if you just take the queen? You would take back. You probably take and take, something like this, right? And at this point, black's lost the right to castle. They're down a pawn, and white should have the advantage of this position once they reroute their pieces around and kind of recoordinate. This should be a more comfortable position for the white side to play. The other line to calculate is taking the knight with the bishop, which is the correct line, but it leads into a tricky sequence here. So, and white calculated this. They saw that they could bring the queen over, pinning the bishop to the king, right? And this is kind of the key feature in the position, more than this bishop under attack, which is obviously a key problem to solve. It's really this pin that is causing all the issues. And again, that pin is there because this king did not castle when it had the chance. So the knight comes forward, which now drops it from, a +2 position to, or -2 position to a +1 position. So white would be favored, or 1.5. So white is strongly favored in this position now. And so the real reason behind that is because it's not solving the pin that's in the position here. The way to do that is to slide the queen over. So if the queen comes over, it now breaks the pin between the bishop, the queen, and the king, right? It interferes. And if the pawn comes forward to attack, the bishop can now drop back and likely, these pieces get traded off. Or if, white decides not to exchange, then you can castle and everything's now fine for black at this point. And not even that, there's threats here of pinning them back. So, likely everything would get exchanged here. And at this point, this would be pretty comfortable for black to play. But it's about breaking the pin, the contact between this king. So getting a piece in front of this king that can defend the bishop, that will then allow this bishop to move, is really the kind of key feature that's in the position right now. When the knight comes out, it does defend the bishop, but it doesn't break the pin. So now this pawn push is pretty lethal, and there's no way to maintain that bishop. And so at some point, this is going to get exchanged. And not only are you losing the bishop back, and now white will have, strong central control with this pawn here, this king is still very, very loose. And could be under more attack. Again, I think at this point, I think you just have to castle. You just have to get your king out, accept the loss. The piece will get taken, but you can, maybe you can counter pin back, or you can start getting some counterplay happening here. You need to look for, those are the kinds of opportunities that maybe black needs to do at this point. You're not able to hold on to this piece, and you're not going to be able to hold on to the material. So drawing the knight back, trying to defend it, again, got a castle. But now at this point, the bishop is now dropped off. Black tries to get some counterplay and win this pawn here. It's worth noting that this knight is now entered the pin. So we are, kind of continuously entering these cycles where black is having a piece pinned on the e5 square. Rook comes forward, attacking the queen. Queen comes back, defending the bishop. If the queen didn't go back to here, that bishop would be able to be taken by the rook. Knight jumps forward. It's totally fine. That's a great move. I mean, there's also just take the pawn, start undermining this knight here. Be really hard for black to survive. Knight jumps in, and now you can see like these pieces are now starting to get cleaned up. Black has to castle at this point to the queen side. And now black has gone down a piece, and it's all because of that pressure that happened on that e5 square. Trying to counterattack the bishop here. Yeah, there's not much hope in this position. This is going to open up the other rook's going to come into the position here. Maybe you can try for some back rank tactics from the white side. Maybe you can slide your rook over or something like that. But there's it's a hard position to play at this point. Black came down, took the rook, and at this point, black gave up in the position. And here are the standings after week 10. Leaf coming out on top with some tiebreak system that I don't understand, but I'm sure it makes sense somewhere. And Trevor in second. We got Funk in third, Baxter in fourth, Tim in fifth, Jared in sixth, Tyler in seventh, and Lucas in eighth. That will be our championship contenders and should be a fun playoff series. We'll cover it here on the Blunderbuss.